Hello and welcome to Mirror Realm. My name's Nick, known as Wyvern on the Sorcery Discord servers. This is part 2 of the podcast with Jarrod about the Geomancer deck that he played and won the Australia and New Zealand Championship with. If you haven't already, I'd highly recommend you listen to part 1 of this podcast first. It can be found on this YouTube channel. That contained an introduction and overview of the deck, as well as a detailed discussion about every single card in the deck. In this second part of the podcast, we're going to first discuss the deck's development, including detailed discussion on a bunch of cards that weren't included in the deck and why they weren't included in the deck. And after that, we're going to discuss the Australia and New Zealand Championship Tournament itself and the weekend in general in Melbourne. Just like the first part, the footage in this video, it'll be me playing the Geomancer deck somewhat suboptimally, and comments will appear on the screen from Jarrod, just pointing out the more optimal play that should have been made. So these comments just appear from time to time. We've tried somewhat to ensure that there's a different variety of matchups in this video compared to the first part, just to get a bit of variety there. There's a few links in the description related to the deck, so feel free to check those out. And without any further delay, I'm going to now jump into the second part of the podcast with Jarrod that we had previously recorded. So let's just talk for a bit about some cards that we referenced some of these a little bit throughout, but let's just do a bit more of a deeper dive into some of the cards that we did try in the deck but ultimately weren't included and why. And I think the best one to start with is Onyx Core. If we could wrap that, well, yeah, let's just start with Onyx Core and then I can do the wrapping after.
So it's pretty much we're trying it for a while, and the games where you played it on turn 1 didn't really feel any different to the games that you didn't, because you didn't really need to do the things that you were doing faster, because you're just going to get there anyway. And the games where you drew it in the mid game or even worse in the late game, it would straight up cost you games sometime. In the end, it just felt Land Surveyors were just straight up better in like all scenarios, even if you played the core on turn 1.
And a big reason for that is just all these it's referenced throughout, right? The foot soldiers buy time, the life gain buys time. There's so many things in this deck that just buy time.
Exactly.
When I'm playing this deck, sometimes it's like turn 6, 7, 8. All you're doing is playing land each turn, and you've gone through 21 mana or whatever that is, and you didn't spend any of it. So that extra 1 mana boost at the cost of a card, even when you can play it on turn 1, isn't necessary. It's probably better than a foot soldier, but not that much. And it's just like you're saying, it's just a game-losing card potentially, right? To draw in the mid to late game.
Yeah, for sure.
Literally anything else that does something.
Because it's the big reason why it's not good in this deck is because there's no card draw. Every card you draw needs to be meaningful, and it's just not meaningful.
I know we had quite the journey, well, because we were doing our testing, right? And obviously we were reading the cards and we had initial evaluation of stuff, and a lot of stuff was like we discovered this was good, and there were things that we thought were so good and maybe it wasn't quite as good as we thought they were. And I think the cores, and maybe to some degree the Philosopher's Stone, they're awesome, and we knew that they were awesome, but they're probably not quite as awesome as we initially thought. They're not an auto-include in every deck. Certainly not off-coloured cores are an auto-include in every deck. Even on-coloured cores are not an auto-include. The Philosopher's Stone isn't an auto-include in every deck. Certainly not if it's mono-coloured. Off-coloured cores are pretty much just straight up better in a mono-coloured deck, especially if it's got any artifacts. But these cards are extremely powerful, but they don't belong in all decks is one thing. And I think in particular, like you're saying with the card draw, they are inherently stronger in Sorcerer is an example, because they will draw lots of cards and they don't want to tap to draw and play sight. So for a Sorcerer, if you draw a sight and then tap to play it, that's effectively in place of drawing 2 spells. So if you drew a core, you could just cast it, so that's costing you effectively 1 card instead of 1 action if you want one of your 2 sort of card drawing actions, whereas playing a sight is 2. So for Sorcerer in particular, cores and stones are way more powerful than for other avatars like Geomancer, who they just work differently. So they are extremely strong cards. They're super powerful, but they don't belong in all decks, not at all. Not even close to it. We could have put a core in this deck. We didn't. And you're certainly not going to put off-coloured cores in this deck.
For sure.
So, I mean, I think there's just a bit maybe, you know, we can do another video at some point just going more in depth about that. I think it's worth just hitting the point a little bit, because I think there is a bit of a perception that you can't compete without these expensive cards.
Yeah,
you went undefeated through all the top 8 with this deck. That if you look at the deck list and you add up what it costs, it's, I mean, I don't know what it is, but it's not very much. It's a very cheap deck to build. Yeah, there are some cards that are worth a bit, but it's a very cheap deck. And there are other decks that are the opposite of that. Like, they play the stone and 4 cores and the princess and this and that. And realistically, this deck probably costs less than it costs to just buy a single Philosopher's Stone for the whole deck, I would guess.
It certainly feels like it's the cheapest best deck, or the best cheapest deck.
It's a good balance. It doesn't cost nothing, but in relative terms, it's pretty cheap to build, and it's super competitive. It's definitely would be possible to build a deck that's...
I'm sure if you were trading with someone who had a lot of stuff, and you had one stone, you could probably give someone 1 stone for this deck, and they would come back and be like, all right, I built the deck for you.
Yep.
To someone who has had a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
for sure.
Exactly. Yeah, so probably the individual card prices are more than the stone, but anyone with the stone is going to trade you all this stuff to get your stuff just because of the... So I think so that's why not the core. Basically just because it's not for this deck, effectively. It's just a straight up worse deck if you include
with it. Correct.
Mixed Terra, we'll talk about that because I know that was in the initial build, and I know that we tested it quite a bit.
They have all the same drawbacks as a core, for sure. They have a few more upsides than a core, but a lot of the things you want to ram into don't really feel great when you play them early. Craterize is not super good when you play it early. You don't want to ramp into any of your other spells. Like Earthquake, they need to have stuff in play before it's good. And a lot of your minions can feel the same way. If you're ramping into a King of the Realm, you potentially, maybe you have like a Land Surveyor and a 1/1 in play, and it doesn't feel great. They wouldn't have had their time to play their mortals either. A Ratanus Titan is like, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's mediocre. If you're just jamming it on the board and not killing anything with it because they haven't moved to your side of the board yet, it just feels bad. It's not getting its good value, so the later in the game that comes down, the more value you get. Conqueror Worm is in that weird position where if it was still in the deck, you're most often jamming it when they still have their berry effects. They're probably going to deal with it super quick. The Midland army sort of has that same issue. And if you're not playing something super big that costs a lot, they just feel worse than a core. And as we said, core already feels bad in this deck.
We were trying the mixes in other decks. Both are fighters.
And it was originally in this deck too, but yeah, they just don't do enough.
I mean, I think in this deck in particular, I think the card just maybe has some general issues that maybe we'll quickly talk about, but in this deck in particular, the main benefit that it gives you, you're effectively trading card disadvantage for speed, right? Whereas the one thing that this deck doesn't need is speed.
Yes.
It automatically buys itself lots of time naturally, so the speed doesn't really matter, and then the trade-off to get that speed that you don't need is sacrificing card advantage.
Which you do need drastically.
Yeah. So it's just
there is also... The small thing with those in Pathfinder in particular is sometimes they fix your thresholds. And because that's never an issue with this deck in particular, it's also another thing that it doesn't do for you.
Sure. I mean, they probably were somewhat viable in the Pathfinder decks, because with Pathfinder, it always has to be a 2-element deck. So it was like we were starting with 2 of each, but we always ended up just cutting one of them, right, and just having 2 of the one, and then it just became one mix of that threshold, and I wouldn't be surprised it would have just ended up being none potentially, right, if you ended up maybe it would have. It does feel like Pathfinder, because it has the threshold issues like you said, that is something where the mix could have a place, but it really just does feel like they're just a bit awkward to use in general.
Yeah, there's just not quite enough card draw in the game in general to make it worth it. And obviously, the best synergy they have is with Sorcerer. But again, you don't really want to put super expensive cards in your Sorcerer decks because you don't generally want to go above maybe 4 sites. So then if you ever draw your expensive cards without your mixes, then it starts to get really awkward. So...
Yeah, I mean, it does... Yeah. I mean, maybe in future sets, they could end up really good, but at the moment,
absolutely, I can see that happening.
They're just not.
And I mean, if we're thinking future sets, then Pathfinder becomes incredible as soon as there's like another play set of lands to choose from, because then you could potentially not just have to play every single site and still only be playing 10 and 10.
Another thing that we tried, I don't know how much. I think you didn't particularly like it. I was like, I don't know. For some reason, I think I was just hopeful to see it work. But the assorted animals /
I think it's
Squirming
certainly. I think it certainly has potential. It's just finding space effectively, and I think there's just better things you can be doing that are more consistent. Like, I think can be very powerful, but at the end of the day, I value consistency over most other things. And yeah, they just felt that tiny bit not consistent enough.
I mean, the assorted animals, it had other, like, you can get the, which as it turns out wasn't that relevant, but it could get the scent hounds. It could get, was it the order?
Root Spider. Yeah, Unicorn and Root Spider, I think, were the other two.
And then also, I think we were looking at it as a package deal with the Squirming Mass, right? Like, it could also add the Squirming Mass.
Yeah, you would never play the Squirming Mass without the assorted animals. But once you are playing assorted animals, it becomes a little bit more viable.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it just felt a little bit too gimmicky with Orb for me, because it didn't feel amazing without the Orb. As like, if you're playing it for 3, you're getting a Root Spider or the Mass. If you're playing it for 6, you get one of each. But as soon as you're playing it with an Orb, it becomes quite strong. But at the end of the day, if you're paying 6 to draw a Root Spider and either a Unicorn or a Squirming Mass, it doesn't feel incredible. But there's certainly matchups where it feels fine, like the really slower matchups. But the deck in particular was more tailored to be beating the faster decks, because it felt like you just win the slower matchups by default anyway through roots.
Yeah, sure.
So at the end of the day, it's certainly powerful enough to be in the deck, but you're doing a lot of powerful stuff anyway, and then something would have to come out. And
what is it?
Yeah, at the end of the day, all the cards that are in there, you want to be playing them. So, and there's already cards that I want to be playing that aren't in there anyway.
Assorted Animals is a card that just feels like it might be really good in the future as well, right? If there's,
for sure. Absolutely.
It's a really good tutor effect if it just had... I mean, it has the Root Spider that you can tutor for, and if it just had some other card that you could grab that cost 1 or 2 that was really good, that you could just always pair with it.
Or even if it was like you could play a second color consistently, like... I think Pit Vipers is a beast. And if you could shoot it for that, it is. So if there was fire in this deck, I would 100% play Assorted Animals, because I think Pit Vipers would be quite a good card to be able to slot into this deck. And if you could shoot it for it as well, because it's also a common, right? It's also an ordinary for common sense.
Exactly. So you could get it with common sense. You could get it.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, that card has a lot of value.
I mean, then you could just play the Assorted Animal just to grab the Pit Viper, right? Nothing else, and just play it immediately in certain.
Yeah, for sure. And then it's super cheap. It's like 1 and 1, and then you're like killing whatever they play. You're feeling pretty solid on the board. At the end of the day, it could be possible to splash a second color in this deck, but consistency, it brings that down, and you already have some quite good cards that you're already not playing, so finding space is difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like Earth is probably the one element where...
that has enough playables.
Problem where you have more really good cards than you can possibly fit in the deck without in a mono element deck.
For sure.
The Angel's Eggs.
For me personally, I think it is one of my favorite cards in the game, because I like playing control decks in general. Life Game is actually quite powerful in this game, and Angel's Egg is very good at doing it. But at the end of the day, for this deck in particular, just did not need more Life Game, because of all the sites just get you there. They do all the things that you want Angel's Egg to do, and you don't have to draw it, you don't have to cast it. And you don't have to have the feeling of mid to late game drawing it when you're already at 20, when you're winning, and you just need something that does more. It is certainly a card that I will be playing in the future in other decks, and played in almost every other deck that we tested that was like on the slower side. And it was incredible in all of them. There was so many games where if you drop double egg, and they don't have a removal for it, and it has to be like a actual kill effect, because if you bury them, or submerge them, you still get the life. And if they don't have it, they just can never kill you.
I mean, with this deck in particular, but I mean also other decks, there's another reason why Root Spider is even better, because you can just play the Angel's Egg straight into the hands of the Burrowed Root Spider, and then there's almost no effect in the game that they can. I mean, there are some, but there's no easy, commonly played effects that are cheap that can do anything about it at all, because they can't target it.
Correct. Yeah, it's sort of like getting down there with the one-off cave trolls and killing the spider, picking it up, and then bringing it back to your side, and that's a lot of turns.
Yeah, I mean, for those that it's not obvious, maybe just reading it if you're not played against it, but it's at the end of each turn, so it's effectively like 2 life per round.
Yes.
Also, you never really playing these as a one-off. It's always 2, and then so many decks, once 2 hits the board, they just can't do anything.
Yeah.
They just can't overcome that.
If you have 2 eggs in play, it effectively, and you're playing anything for the rest of the game, you should be fine. You shouldn't be able to die. You have to not play anything for quite a few turns for them to be able to overrun you.
Okay, we'll talk about a couple others. We'll just lump them together because I think effectively they have the same issue. So that's the Dalcean, Phalanx, and the Pudge Butcher.
Yeah.
It's just mobility pretty much. Like their drawback was just too big. They lacked the mobility.
Yeah, for the most part. The Pudge, just because it can't block, was a big issue. You could sometimes get away with being able to line it up all right, but when you don't have blinks or ways to manipulate your Pudge consistently, it gets a lot harder to use. And when you're not aggressive, you can't just jam it in front of the opposing avatar and hit them for a million turns. The Phalanx is a bit better than the Pudge in this deck in particular, because the moving sideways is certainly relevant when you want to be defensive, but it is also massive, and the turn that you play it, they can't attack through that lane anymore. And if it wasn't for the fact that you have to go so wide, you could probably get away with playing it. If you want to play like a more aggressive version of the deck with Phalanx and Pudge and like lower your curve by quite a bit, maybe cap off at 5 or 6, then it could be pretty strong. But at that point, you're pretty much playing a different deck, and you're better off just playing Avatar of Earth, I would say.
And Overpower, I think, is something that was in this deck.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned it earlier. Overpower is very strong. The fact you can get it with common sense is like it was in and out of the deck quite often. And at the end of the day, I just went for the Gigantism because I was playing Orb, and it just gives you that bit more reach. Overpower is like more of a trick for removal, more so than reach. And I didn't really feel like I needed more removal. And just more often than not, if I was going to be common sensing, a Berry is generally better in almost all circumstances than an Overpower. The only time it's not really is if it's turn 3 and I want to kill something with a 1-power minion, or if they're on water.
Yeah,
so it was very much just a space. It was very much just a space card, and yeah, it is incredible with Root Spider when you're trying to fight other Root Spiders. But at the end of the day, I already have cave trolls for that. So
yep, yeah, you have the other solutions.
Yeah,
we talked about that. But yeah, I think in summary, I mean, you're basically saying it probably would make the cart if the orb was removed, and the Gigantism would also be removed, and then probably
I think it would definitely be a card that came in.
Yeah,
and in that scenario, I think if you did that, you'd probably want to bring in a third common sense as well.
Yeah, so interestingly, by cutting the orb to make a bit of extra space, you're losing extra space. Something like that.
Yeah, that was a big reason why I brought in the orb, actually, is because it sort of let me trim some of the spells down, right? Like, if I didn't have the orb, I'd want to be playing a third common sense for sure. Maybe even a fourth, but most likely 3 would be the number. I'd want to play a third Divine Healing. I'd potentially want to play another Border Militia. Yeah, and that would probably be about it. But yeah, so it doubles up on enough of the other cards to let you trim some of the numbers effectively.
I think they're the main cards that we did try. Like, we tried other stuff just very quickly, right? And it was just in and out, no good. But these cards in particular were actually tried. Like, we played a bunch of matches.
Extensive testing, yes.
But there's some other cards quickly. Some of these we might have tried in one game and then just binned them straight away. But these are just cards that I heard people mentioning we were watching you play on the live stream in the store, and some people were just asking about the deck and whether these cards were in it, or just generally curious, or why they weren't in it, sort of thing. Or they were mentioned on the commentators for the stream. Do you remember the names of them?
It was Isaac from the store, and I can't remember the name of the dev from...
Was it Sean?
Maybe. I'm not 100%. But yeah, he was one of the devs from the actual Sorcery team.
And cards that they shouted out, right? So I just made a list of cards that people sort of felt like maybe they should be in the deck. We'll just run through them quickly. So one of them was Gnome Hollows, but we already covered that at length. I mean, I think in summary, you don't want to play it where you start because you want a village and you don't want to move. And you also have a bunch of creatures that have more than 2 power yourself that just generally makes it awkward. Free City.
I think Free City actually deserves like a at-length discussion. Like, I mean, not super long, but, a little bit more than we would have thought. Free City, we tried it a reasonable amount, and in decks where you can be very narrow and sort of force your opponent to be either attacking on the Free City or like maybe one away, it feels incredibly strong. But because you end up going super wide with this deck and they have so many different locations to attack, you can't really force them onto the Free City. And that was sort of the point where it just felt way better to play Roots combo, because you can't really play Free Cities and a Roots combo and still hit all your Earth thresholds early for your replacement. And at that point, it was one or the other, and Roots just felt always better.
Yeah, but Free City is amazing in some as well. Like any deck, you can just fit them that doesn't go wide. They're so strong, and they also, like, it doesn't necessarily, it might not be obvious or necessarily feel that, but they also have pretty amazing synergy with Root Spider, just because the Root Spider can lock down the site that isn't the Free City, so they have to come through the Free City.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's really good, just not good for this deck. I mean, the same can be said about Gnome Hollows. Yeah, it's a pretty good card, just not for this deck.
It's also like Free City in this deck isn't even bad per se. It's just not the best, not the better option.
Yeah,
like if,
the Roots combo. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, because the Roots combo is basically auto win if you can pull it off, and you can, well,
for sure,
you can pull it off sometimes.
Exactly.
So,
I mean, so I should probably mention about the Roots combo. On average, it's probably, I don't know, 1 in 6 games in like the shorter games that you pull it off. Maybe even 1 in 5, which is enough. There's quite a few games where you just have the Roots and it's just a threat. But then in all of the slower matchups that you have plenty of time to get there, you very rarely miss it when you actually need it. There's obviously very fringe cases where it'll be in like the bottom 2 or 3 sites of your library. And even then, you can sometimes get to it via like crossroads and through mulligans. If the game goes long enough, you will quite often just spend a lot of turns tapping to draw sites and not even playing them. Just because once you're at 8, you don't need to go above, and then you can just sit there and draw. And then you will get there, and then you just play it and you win. And then because you've been drawing so many lands, you can even just, you don't even have to replace at that point. If it was the last one in your deck, you can just play them from hand, and it's completely the same.
I guess if Roots didn't exist in the game, then maybe the Free Cities would be in the deck, I guess, in summary. But
I think for sure, yeah.
Free City is really good, just not for this deck.
Yeah.
House Arn Bannerman. Somebody mentioned that it should be in the deck.
I mean, it wouldn't be bad, and I think if it was an ordinary, I'd probably play 1 copy to be able to common sense for it. But it sort of just doesn't do what you want to do with the deck. Like, you're not that worried about just getting in with a bunch of early dudes, pumping them up. There's certainly times when it acts like an overpower, and it's that little bit of a trick. But I think in more situations than not, it's not that great. Like, if you ever have to play it as your only minion, it feels horrendously bad. And yeah, it doesn't really do what you want. Like, it sort of does a similar thing to King of the Realm, but if King of the Realm didn't take their minions, it wouldn't be in the deck. So it's sort of just like a bad King of the Realm in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, I think because effectively, I mean, it's not exactly an aggro card, but it's a card that it's sort of better sort of fitted to sort of weenie decks, I suppose, right? That are naturally a bit more aggressive in nature.
And one other thing with this deck is you generally don't want to have all your minions nearby each other. because this generally opens you up to
Earthquake,
AoE removal, like Earthquake and Poison Nova and all the, and like major explosions and all of these various things that are in the meta. So it certainly lets you play your things wherever you want, and that is actually, when you go so wide, it is actually a very big thing.
Yeah, and like the general strategy, right, is to backline your
For sure.
minions early. Like it's just sort of like a whole entire play style thing around the deck. Whereas if you have the Bannerman, it's very.
It also has,
if everything's backlined.
It also has horrible synergy with Stonegaze Gorgon.
Yep. Yep. But yeah, as you said, maybe if it was ordinary, maybe there would be one, maybe not.
Yeah, I think if it was like a tutor for it when you need it. I mean, I definitely thought about it during our testing, but I sort of thought through all the scenarios where it would be good and where it wouldn't be. And at the end of the day, it was not good more than it was bad. So it just did make a cut.
Bone Rabble?
Just not good enough. This doesn't really do anything. You know, it's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
it can just stay as a promo.
It potentially has a bit of synergy sort of thing, but it's just the card is just not, it's just too weak, right?
Yeah,
like
pretty much.
If it was just better, if it was just a better card somehow, whether it was like had high power or lower cost or something.
Yeah, I think if it cost 2, or if it had 2 power and cost 4 maybe. I think if it was the same as Scourge Zombie, it would probably be playable. But at the end of the day...
But it's worse in this deck anyways, right? Like, even if it costs 2 power, it's still worse than the zombies for this particular deck, right? So...
I mean, yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, pretty much. It just I'm not sure. It just doesn't really do enough. I mean, at the end of the day, and it is what it is, it costs 3 and it's for 1 power. It just does not do enough.
Yeah. It's just...
Like, even if you played it on 3 and you would have to block with it on that turn to get any sort of value because you play it the next turn. And potentially, if you were playing against a deck that was attacking it every turn, maybe it's okay. But it comes into the Earth site that you play as well. So there will be times when you can't even use it as a blocker because it'll be too far away from wherever they are. So yeah, there's just too many scenarios where it just does not do anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
And then there's the times where you play Crossroads or Sinkhole or Roots, and it doesn't come back.
Yeah. I think with Earth as well, right? Like, you got so many good options, and maybe in a draft or something where you just didn't get enough playables, it makes the cut. But the thing is, it's constructed. There are so many good choices where you're picking between all these different really good cards for the deck, and this card is just a not very strong card.
Yeah. It's at the end of the day, it is ordinary, so it could be gotten with common sense, and it still just does not do enough, even when you can do that. So it's
yeah,
for sure.
In summary, it's not in the deck because it's a bad card, pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe it's possible to build some kind of deck where it may be in it.
You could potentially play it in like a Trebuchet deck where you're playing Scourge Zombies and Bone Rabbles, and then it's, you know, actually gets value if you never have to cast it the first time.
Sure. Yeah.
And you're not just skipping one of your turns to cast it. Maybe then it feels okay, but even then you'd need multiples of them, and who knows. But yes, that's not this deck.
We won't hate on the card too much. It's just, I guess it's just not good enough for this deck when there's so many other good options.
Yes.
Queen of Midland?
Well, it ended up in the sideboard. I think just in general, you're going to have too many cards in hand to be consistently drawing, and it's very easy to kill. And it's got like the same problem with King of the Realm, where you sort of just have to cast it and jam it in a corner, but it also doesn't do as much as King of the Realm. But yeah, it was in the sideboard for, I don't know, heavy control decks. Like, I didn't even bring it in against Enchantress, and that would have been the best time to have actually played it. But even there, still doesn't feel like it does enough.
Yeah,
it's not bad if you go Royal Bodyguards into it. Sure, but...
I mean, for this deck in particular, something that isn't probably obvious to people who would suggest it is that you're generally holding cards in your hand. You have turns where you could cast something, but the optimal play is to hold it back to get like a 2 or 3 for 1 with it. And because you're always holding these cards back, it just has a really bad synergy with Queen of Midland. that rewards dumping your hand on the board.
That is another thing that I probably should have mentioned earlier is quite often you can, like, you're just leveraging your life as like a, you know, to not even, you don't even need to deal with everything the turn it comes in. You can just leverage your life and then get like more value out of playing something else a bit later, and then get life off your lands or your divine healings. Just trying to leverage your divine healings to wait longer to do things as well, which again makes Queen of Midland even worse. The one reason it ended up in the sideboard was, to be honest, there's not that many cards you even want a sideboard in. But for Deathspeaker, like, it's potentially a card that might have been good against that Deathspeaker if I played it in the top 8. Because, yeah, it's a little bit too fragile. And if it didn't have the they need to have more cards than you line, it probably wouldn't be in the deck. But, yeah, it does, so nope.
Star Seeds of
It just doesn't really do anything that you need to do. Because you're not moving, you only ever, realistically, most games, you just replace the first 3 adjacent. You can do that just by playing sites, earth sites, easy enough. I could see it being a consideration if you were like 2 or 3 elements, and then maybe you need it to get your Rabble, but at the end of the day, it's one of those cards that falls in the, each card you draw needs to be doing something effective.
Yeah, I mean, it
needs to have a lot of value, and that does not do that at all.
Yeah, the 3-color Geomancer deck doesn't really feel like it's probably going to be that doable at the moment with just the one. It does feel like a card that kind of just, 2 or 3 sets time, maybe all of a sudden it's awesome.
Yeah, once there's a few more dual lands, potentially it gets maybe good, but
some other avatar or something, or just some other card, right? That does some interaction with Rubbles, but for now it just it
maybe if
like
there's
a lot of synergy with Geomancer, but I think, as you said, in particular, you don't ever want to move, and because of that, it doesn't really have very good synergy at all.
I could see it having use if there was a Void deck that was very good, and they got like a lot of things from being in the Void. Because it removes all voids from the game, but
so maybe it's
outside of that, maybe
if void is super popular,
yeah, for sure.
Bosk Troll,
it's just, it doesn't really do enough, and it's almost all the minions in this deck are good against Lightning Bolt, except for like Gorgons and King of the Realm, and it's Lightning Bolt was enough of a consideration in all of our testing that we sort of tried to make our decks more resilient to it.
And by lightning, you mean slash thunderstorm, basically, right?
Sure. Yeah, all the 3 damage effects, and like firebolts, all those sort of things. Because Boss Troll, it's not a very defensive card in that way. It's more of like you're playing it to trade with other Boss Trolls or maybe kill Violence and things like that. And at the end of the day, you're already good at doing that, and it's another one of those cards that's not super impactful if you draw it a bit later.
The big thing with this deck is that you don't get to draw the cards, right? There's no card draw, so you have to get your card advantage through efficient trading, and the Boss Troll just doesn't efficiently trade. Yeah,
the Boss Troll pretty much always just goes 1 for 1, whereas almost every other card in the deck is going at least 2 for 1, or doing something powerful enough that if they don't have the one right answer, then you're winning, like the Gorgons and the King.
Entangle Terrain?
That was one that we completely overlooked. We read it the first time and it was like, yeah, maybe it's not that good. We definitely didn't test it. I had it played against me in the tournament itself, and it was pretty strong. It did quite a lot of work. I'm not that unhappy that I didn't play it, because it is a card that doesn't actually generate any advantage. It's just a complete stall card. So it gives you the 3 turns of not taking damage. But this deck's pretty good at doing that anyway, of not taking damage over a few turns or just healing it back up.
Yeah, but it feels like at the very least, maybe it was going to be a better sideboard card, right, than something that was included.
For sure.
Maybe better than the Queen of Midland, for example, in the sideboard.
Absolutely a card that would need testing, and just it should have been tested, and we just overlooked it.
We did test loads, but ultimately there's so many cards, right? Like, we can't possibly test everything properly.
We came to this Geomancer deck very late in our testing as well. We got to this because I got to the point of playing various Pathfinder decks and constantly getting mana screwed by hitting the wrong thresholds, that I just went, I got to try something else.
Pretty angry. We're not angry.
Yeah, it was like
just frustrating.
It was just very frustrating, and like it just felt like I was playing Magic at that point. I'm like, I'm going to play something more consistent and see how we go.
Definitely something in there for the path. I mean, because I know I played against somebody who was a bit frustrated that they didn't hit their triple five or something, right? But it's like
I had the same thing in my first round of top 8. My Pathfinder opponent it took him, I think, until land 6 to hit his first fire threshold.
Yeah, but that can happen, right? Like if you do
absolutely, it happened multiple times in testing. Like, you know, it happens probably 1 out of maybe 6 games that you don't hit the double of the right threshold, but it's pretty unlikely that you won't hit one of the other threshold in your first 6, but it happens. And when it's a best of 1 format, consistency matters. I mean, once you get to the top 8, it's best of 3, it's a little bit less important because you can afford to drop a game. But if you do it twice, obviously that feels super horrible as well.
The Curiosa website can be your friend here, not just with the Pathfinder, but with all decks, because when you build your deck, you can see the initial draw, and then for Pathfinder, you can basically just pretend that was the first 3, right? And then you can just go draw side, draw side, draw side, draw side, draw side, and you can see how the first 6 or 7 come out, and you can do that like in just
hundreds
an hour,
of times within a few hours.
Yeah, and get a feel, because if you just played 5 or 6 matches, or you know what I mean, beforehand playing, and it didn't happen once, that doesn't mean that it's consistent. You have to do it hundreds of times to get a proper sample size, and their website allows you to do that, right? To do it hundreds of times quickly.
Which we absolutely did with most of our decks.
Yeah.
Like, we worked out you can do it like, you know, you can do like 1,000 draws consistently within an hour. And that, you know, 1,000 draws is enough to test out if it's going to be how you feel about a mana draw, pretty much.
Because I think you kind of really were drawn to the Pathfinder, but in the end, it just feels like there needs to be another set, as you said before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when there's one more set, Pathfinder will probably be one of my main avatars for sure.
Frontier Settlers.
That was a card it sort of felt like Land Surveyors 5 through 7, but they're also just not quite as good as the Surveyors in general, just because they can be picked off, or having the land in hand later is good for Crater Eyes, and positioning, because your first few lands are so awkward in their positioning later can be extremely important. And at the end of the day, if it was an ordinary, there'd probably be 1 in the deck, but it's not, so it's just that little bit too hard to make work. And it could be right that maybe 1 or 2 is good, but again, it sort of has the same Onyx Core feel, where you don't need the ramp, and it doesn't really do anything but ramp, whereas the Land Surveyors, because of the Crater Risers having the land in hand, it's not only ramp. But yeah, they're not terrible. It's just space again. You have to cut something.
Yeah, I mean, and also you're potentially getting additional awkward site placements.
Yeah, exactly.
Potentially. But I think another big thing with them is the double Earth threshold, that you're not really, unlike the Surveyor, where with this deck, you're basically guaranteed to be able to play them on turn 2. That's not true. That's not true for the Frontier Settlers, right?
Because if you have 5 lands in your deck, that if you replace them on turn 2, and you always have to replace on turn 2, otherwise your opponent can potentially replace your Rabble. Yeah, there's 5 lands where you might not be able to hit your double threshold, and it does come up. And without them being in the deck, all of the time when you hit a sinkhole as your first site, you feel amazing, because you can just use it and then replace it, and it never feels bad.
Yeah, and you did mention the pick off, but that's, I think, additionally important for this deck, where the card advantage is you're getting it through efficient trades, and to sort of one for nothing yourself is like extraordinarily bad for this deck compared to an average deck. You
also can't play it and get a land for the turn. It's always the turn after, which, you know, there's quite a few times where your hand might be just that little bit awkward on like 2 through 5, and you just want that land in your hand guaranteed so that you can map out your turns. So yeah, it is just strictly worse than Land Surveyor. in this deck in particular.
I mean, also it's even more awkward, right, with the Rubbles, because you can play it somewhere where they would move into it, but you have less flexibility where you can place it, because you don't want to place it where obviously what they're doing is replacing a Rubble, right? It's going to replace someone that's a non-Rubble.
Your best option for playing a Land Surveyor on turn 2 is in your back row on your Geomancer. It has to be up in the front, because otherwise you can't do the Rubbles there. It takes up one of your adjacent locations.
Yeah. So you would have to effectively frontline the settlers, right? Which makes them susceptible to desert, and then you're like 0 for wanting yourself.
And violence. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So there's a bunch of reasons, really. And that ordinarily drawing the site is just worse, but the Geomancer in particular, that's not true for. And then also it's also not true straight up because of Craterize and stuff. So it's like...
Correct.
Even just the drawing versus immediately playing is questionable. What's better? And then the fact that you get to draw on the Genesis.
And the fact that they could drop your roots on the wrong side of your sinkhole, and then you need to do a bunch of other things to get it to work later on. So there's enough drawbacks on top of it already being worse than Land Surveyor that it just doesn't make the cut.
Yeah, and I mean, and just to be clear here, we're not saying it's a bad card at all. I mean, I think you're saying basically that if it was ordinary, maybe there's one in the deck, despite all of these drawbacks, maybe there's still one in the deck anyways, right? Just to get with the common sense, because it is a good card.
On turn 6, when or maybe 5 or 4, when you've already replaced one of your adjacent Rubbles, and you can cast them onto when it's a site, all of a sudden then most of the time it is better than Land Surveyor. But it has to be on those turns. And particularly late game, when you can't throw its way to Craterize, is when it feels particularly bad.
Yeah, sure. In summary, drawing the site is sometimes just better than being able to play it. The Genesis happens straight away, so if you get something, if they pick it off, you still get some value out of the Land Surveyor, but you don't with the Settlers. You can common sense for the Land Surveyor, but not the Settlers.
You also can't block with the Settlers the turn they come in if you want to get the site.
Yep. Yeah. So that, and then you also have effectively, if you want to get the site, which obviously you pretty much do want to get the site, you have additional placement restrictions in regards to what they can potentially block or do. You have the double Earth threshold, which makes them not always playable on turn 2, and then you have some potentially like additional awkwardness around getting your roots combo off, whereas the Land Surveyor is the opposite, like it's extra help to get it off. So there's a huge list of reasons why the Land Surveyor is just better, but it's still a good card, and maybe it's still in the deck if it's ordinary as a one-off. Master Tracker?
So at the end of the day, it's just just strictly worse than Scent Hounds for what you want it to do, because it can't be tutored for. And it's also double Earth threshold, but by the time you need it, you have your double Earth threshold. But yeah, it's just strictly worse than Scent Hounds in this particular scenario.
Yeah, I mean, because specifically it's just as an answer to, I mean, maybe some other stuff, but to Infiltrate in particular. So if Scent Hound isn't ordinary, it's not in the deck. It's only there because it can be tutored for with common sense.
Absolutely.
And this isn't. So, but yeah, it's like obviously the effect is more powerful, that it's the whole realm, right? Instead of just nearby. Yeah. Mountain Giant?
I mean, it's basically the Worm, but it's probably worse, and already the Worm probably shouldn't have been in the deck, so pretty much the same reasoning.
Maybe in the future with other cards and stuff, maybe it's a lot better card, but right now the main reason why it's potentially good is just if it's played on across water and non-water sites, it can't be either buried or submerged. But I think in particular, just because of with Enchantress getting a bit more popular in the meta as well, people got a bit better at positioning their sites as well to like not create boxes of sites, which makes Mountain Giant to create voids. But I think it's just not, like you say, it's just not great. I mean, it has some amazing synergy with things like potential for synergies, like with Land Deed and stuff, but it's just not this deck, right? That's just the deck.
Sure.
Sisters of Silence?
I think they're actually quite good, and probably a sideboard card. And if they were ordinary and you could common sense for them, I would 100% be playing one. But at the end of the day, they're not, and they're a little bit fragile, so it's just better options.
Wicked Witch?
I'm Not sure about this card. Like, I think it probably deserved a bit more testing. And at the end of the day, the spellcaster does nothing for me. Most of the small minions decks, like the aggressive decks, you're already pretty good against. So I think it's a solid card, but just not necessary.
Not for this deck.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe, and again, it's obviously you have these, we're talking about cards in isolation, but when you're changing things, obviously you'd have to review the whole list, right? So
for sure,
maybe others, like for example, you were saying that I always get these mixed up. I think it's the Dispel, right? Or Disenchant. I can't remember. Dispel, I think, is the Earth one. So, for example, the Dispel isn't in the deck because you don't have any spellcasters, but then if you had the Wicked Witches, then maybe the Dispel would all of a sudden be in the deck. Maybe not, but maybe so, right?
Yeah.
So it's...
And I think in a best of one tournament with no best of 3 top 8, I think there's enough scenarios where the Dispel might even be in the deck anyway. But yeah, it didn't feel like it was necessary when there was a top 8 with best of 3.
So I think the last one on this list of cards that I heard people raise just Shield Maidens as to...
It's mostly for things like Poison Nova and potentially Grim Reaper, things like that. And at the end of the day, it's possible that it's good enough to make a sideboard slot, but it doesn't really do enough. It has like a similar effect to Crusade and King of the Realm when you're being on the defensive side of the combat.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, it doesn't quite do as much as those cards do. So
yeah. So
again, it's another one of those. If it was ordinary, they'd probably be one in the deck.
Sure. Yeah. But do you think that's better or worse than for this deck in particular than the Bannerman?
I think the fact that it gets around 1 damage effects, like the lethal 1 damage effects, is probably, in those scenarios, it definitely is better. But, those scenarios probably come up quite a bit less than just general creature combat. So it's
sure.
Yeah, they both probably feel similar slots and just don't quite do just enough.
If you were to play the same tournament again, maybe not literally exactly the same opponents because that's too specific, but yeah, if you were to play in the same tournament again, this is touched upon throughout already, but we'll just summarize it here. Like, what cards would you add and remove from the deck if you were going to play again? I
feel like the only one that I would definitely do is minus a Conqueror Worm for a Scourge Zombies. The very potential is like maybe take the Orb out and the Gigantism, but then when you do that, sort of have all the similar issues of like I was talking about earlier, where like then you have to play the 3rd Divine Healing and add in the Common Sense, and then you sort of want to play another Border Militia, and then all of a sudden the Orb gets better, so maybe it wants to go back in. I think at the end of the day, the deck list was pretty much exactly what it should have been, with minus a Worm plus a Scourge Zombies, and because Infiltrate didn't pop up quite as much as was expected, and there was like Enchantress and things like that popping up, so the Disenchant probably potentially deserved the home in the main deck. But outside of that, I think the deck list was pretty spot on.
I mean, the Scent Hound's just gets moved to the sideboard probably, and something else comes in, but yeah, okay. And I think just there's a bit of a theme here really, because the zombies are giving you card advantage, right? Just because they can chomp and come back and chomp and maybe trade, and they can
the zombies again. The zombies in particular were very good in the Avatar of Earth matchup, and I played it way more than I was expecting to, and I thought it would be much worse of a matchup. The games I had in the Swiss were very close against Avatar of Earth, whereas the ones in the top 8 were not. And the one where I had sideboarded into the Scourge on me was even less of a close game. They got so much value.
By the way, and we played each other in the Swiss, so yeah, and we had played testing it a little bit. I think we just purposely probably didn't want to play our decks too much against each other, just to make it a little bit interesting if we played each other, which we did. It certainly wasn't. It never felt like this was a bad matchup for you. On paper, it feels like for whatever reason it should be, but in practice, it just ain't. It always felt like.
I mean, your avatar is effectively always a 9-power avatar, sometimes 10, but there's enough blockers that you sort of get around it a little bit, and quite often the divine healings were completely dead because you were just on death's door trying not to die, just hoping that you didn't hit like the right combination of blink grapples to finish you.
Yeah.
And then it was sort of just getting over the line because you were taking quite a bit of chip damage to just get through all the blockers. That was definitely how I won one of my matches in the Swiss. Like I actually got off the roots, but I had I think 3 bedrocks in play, so he was still wailing away on me, and it was just basically I was on death's door, he wasn't, and I had to just keep jamming chump blockers every turn, and if I ever didn't hit one for a turn, I was dead. But eventually got over the line, and a big part of that was due to villages as well.
Yep, sure. That's also why, I mean, the orb keeps coming in and out, but in the end, it's just another form of card advantage, a significant one, both in terms of getting duplicates of the spells, but, also more efficient trades and stuff. So Earth doesn't have the card draw, but it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like the closest you can sort of get for this deck as card draw, if you like.
Yeah, for sure.
So the zombies are giving you card advantage in a way, and the worm is potentially the one card, especially the one expensive card in the deck, where if you just play it and they just kill it, you just sort of got nothing out of it.
Yeah, the Scourge Zombies, even if every time they come back they're worth a third of a card, eventually that's going to add up. And when they're stopping Avatar of Earth hitting you for 10 a turn, it feels pretty good.
Yep. The sideboard, I mean, we talked about this a bit throughout, but is there any cards that we haven't covered yet that now that you played the tournament, you're like, wish that was in the sideboard? Or maybe that should have been in the, maybe not literally for the matchups that you had, but for the matchups that you might have had in the top 8 if you had to play different opponents, or some of the other decks that just missed out on the top 8 if they had made it and you had to play them. Is there a card that... Because you said the sideboard was a bit awkward to use because there wasn't cards you wanted to take out, so... Like, is there cards that you, if they were in there, that maybe there would have been matchups they would come in for?
There was... I think overall it's fairly reasonable as to what it should be. I think the big thing about the sideboard is most of the good cards are already in the deck that you want to be playing against most decks. Against Enchantress, I just wanted to bring out things like Root Spider and my berries and my Cavians and things like that because they were super awkward. So there potentially could have been more cards that you wanted to bring in for when you wanted to take cards out. Scourge Zombies was a big reason why there was 4 of those in the sideboard, was for that similar thing. One card that didn't end up making the sideboard that might have been alright was Tragedy Worrywart. And it fills a similar role of Royal Bodyguard, but at the end of the day, probably wouldn't have sideboarded it in anyway, but maybe I would have brought it in against Enchantress as well, just because why not? But if I was particularly sideboarding for that matchup, it would have just been more spells. At the end of the day, this deck in particular doesn't really need a sideboard, because all the answers to the questions are mostly in the main anyway.
Yeah, and a big part of that is common sense, right? Because, most of the tournaments running around the world don't have Chaos Twister banned, unlike the event we played in, so it changed a lot for us in card evaluation and the testing and decks, because there were so many things that were just totally horrible against Chaos Twister, and there's so many decks that felt really bad once you're going to swap out the Chaos Twister for any other card. It made it way more interesting for starters, in my opinion, the fact that card was banned, because all of the existing tech online couldn't be directly applied. The effort that we put in paid off, I guess you could put it, something like that. I think there's a question in here somewhere which is something like, if Chaos Twister was in the tournament and you were to play this deck, I guess for starters, would you play this deck still? And then how do you feel if Chaos Twister, if you had to play against it, how bad is that for the deck or not? And, what would you change about it, just specifically in regards to Chaos Twister?
So, first off, I'll say, when I was first making this deck, I thought Chaos Twister would be a real issue for this deck. But the more I've thought about it since the event, it might not be that bad. Like, it would be a very good card against you, and probably the best card in the game against this deck in particular. But it probably wouldn't be the end of the world. I think you could get away with it. I think I would again. The Conqueror Worm would come out. It would never have even been in the list if Chaos Twister was in the format. And I don't know if I would play it. I would probably be playing a deck with Chaos Twister in it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the thing that upsets a lot of people is the random effect, but I think for us the more interesting thing about it being removed wasn't really that the sort of the randomness of the effect was removed per se. It was just the fact that the card, the sheer power level of the card, it's just the best removal spell by miles, and when you remove that, it makes so many decks that just basically get away with playing almost no removal, and 2 Chaos Twisters, they're just viable, right? And all of a sudden all these decks are not, and there's so many decks where a Chaos Twister just is the perfect answer to just about every problem they can pose. The lack of this card being in the tournament just sort of profoundly changed what decks are viable.
Absolutely.
Both in terms of playing against decks that don't have it, but also in terms of this deck isn't really a very good deck if it can't have Chaos Twister as a solution.
Yeah.
And that is another reason why Earth got even better, right? In our particular, it was already the best, and then it's even better because it has all the best removal spells except for Chaos Twister, and now it just has all the best removal spells except for nothing.
If you think about it, is like when you compare it to Cave-In, it's just better in almost every scenario than Cave-In, and Cave-In was incredible for me in this tournament. The only time it's not is if you want to deal with artifacts.
If Chaos Twister is in the format, I'm sure that we would have spent just as much time testing blowing cards off our hand as what we would have spent testing playing the game.
Just about.
If you could get to the point where you could nail that with 97% accuracy or whatever, where you're aiming, that card goes from being the best removal spell in the format and potentially the best card in the game, right? To I don't know. If you can hit it with 100% accuracy, the card is insane. I mean, it's insane even if you can't, right? And it's I don't know. It's for me, the bigger interesting point, I would just reiterate it, is just the fact that such a powerful card was removed from the format and the shake-up that causes. And I was actually less concerned with the randomness of the card, which to be fair also concerns me. But the bigger concern is just the raw power level of the card.
For sure.
So in summary, I think the answer to that question, by the way, is removed Conqueror Worm, add the zombies, right?
Scourge zombie, yeah.
Which was already probably
gonna happen
even if there is no Chaos Twister. So I guess in a way, no change, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
There might be a play style change or not. I mean, you already play pretty wide anyways, which is good against Chaos Twister.
Yeah. It'd probably be, you'd rarely want to have more than one of your fatties on the board at a time, which more often than not is the case anyway. But it comes up where you might have like a unicorn and like a Wanderers or a Bodyguard or something, and then all of a sudden that curve, like if you go unicorn into Bodyguard, all of a sudden that curve gets very destroyed by a Twister of just picking up your Bodyguard and throwing it at your unicorn, and then all of a sudden it's not great, but then they've spent their turn 4 not developing the board, and you're not super unhappy about that. Because anytime there's like an even board state of just a clear board, you're happy. And if they have to use it that early, it's not throwing away one of your super like top end cards, which also super nice. I mean, the big worry is if you get a Midland army thrown into your face.
Yeah. Which,
most of the time you're probably going to have enough life to deal with that, but it could put you to death door on some matchups.
We basically never actually played the card, right? Because it was banned, so it's quite I think it's quite accurate, but it's also quite speculative in a way. Do you know what I mean? Like we didn't,
for sure.
We don't know that these things are for certain, right? We're sort of like guessing to some degree. I think with reasonable assumptions being made here, but yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing about Chaos Twister not being in our format was we just completely dismissed Avatar of Air. Like we just thought without that, it's probably not even worth considering. And then one of them came third. Kevin, he did quite a good job, and it was still a pretty good deck.
And it would just be better, right? There's no way that Chaos Twister doesn't make that deck even better, and it was also really good without it. So
yeah, absolutely.
And that was on us, because we did try. It's not like we did dismiss it, but we also tried. We were trying to get builds to work, and we just couldn't. And he sort of discovered some tech that was really good that we never tried. Kudos to him, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah, at the end of the day, I think we could have gone deeper on it, but we thought there's no Chaos Vista, why bother? Let's put more effort into other things.
I really like Avatar of Air, sorry. I was keen to try and play it, so it was, yeah.
I certainly think it's pretty cool also.
It's fun. And it's even funner after having... Yeah, I think also another thing with... I mean, we're going off on a bit of a tangent here, but let's give Kevin his props. The deck's really strong, but I think also it's really awkward to play against. It certainly was for me, and I think it will be for a lot of people, and I think it just generally for people, it's not something that most people would have experience playing against. A bit like Enchantress was, I guess, before it was popular, and you sort of would just naturally win matches because people have no idea what to do, effectively. They just don't know how they're supposed to play, and they're just going to make a bunch of mistakes.
Which certainly could have been something that came up with my deck as well. It's people not ever having played against a Geomancer before and not really knowing what to expect.
Yeah.
I know I pulled off a Craterize in the finals and against Enchantress, and he's like, "Oh, you're playing Craterize as well? Okay, I didn't even think about that." So
yeah, sure. Because you sort of, in a way, in order for you to get the value out of your cards, to some degree, you're relying on them to overextend to some degree. But I think...
Yes and no.
Yeah, it's complicated. It's a very awkward thing to play against because you don't want to hold back and you don't want to... I mean, I tested against this deck a lot with all sorts of decks. It's really awkward to play against because you don't want to overextend and you don't want to go slow, right?
Yeah, because if you're playing a slow game, I'm going to do more in a slow game, and if you don't want to overextend because there's multiple sweepers, so it's certainly a fine line to walk.
But I think that's a good sign for our testing, just generally when you're playing this Geomancer deck, I'm playing whatever deck for the testing, for us to test all the different matchups, and we're transparent about making the optimal plays, right? And even then, it does well. This Geomancer deck was doing well, even when your opponent...
With perfect information.
We're trying to make the perfect plays for them, knowing how this deck works, and knowing its weaknesses, and knowing what it's trying to do, and knowing all of that, and still putting all of that in, and it still was winning consistently.
Yeah,
and then,
which is a big part of why I think if Chaos Fist is in the meta, I think it still can be a good deck. Not like the standout absolutely crush everyone like it currently is, but it's certainly more of a consideration.
Sure. I think we're at the end here with everything we wanted to cover with it. So is there some final thoughts on this deck? Anything that we haven't naturally covered already? I mean, we covered a lot.
No, I think we probably covered most things.
Is it fun to play?
That's what I was just about to say. I think it's for me, I don't think it'll be super fun for everybody, but for me, I like to play a more control-y, slower style of play where you ramp up and overwhelmingly win. It was very fun for me to play and really up my alley. But if you're a very aggressive player, I can't see this being a good time for you.
And then also, I mean, there was one match that timed out, and in the tournament we played, that counted as a loss for both players if it was a draw. And obviously it's a little bit, the fact that it is a control deck and the nature of it makes it just slower, obviously. You have an increased possibility for that to happen when you play slower control deck.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like we both probably could have played a little bit faster, but at the end of the day, it's the first time he's seen the deck, so he's probably playing a little bit slower, trying to work out what was happening.
I mean, I didn't mean the specific question. I just meant generally, how do you feel about the fact that there's always a possibility that one of your rounds that's just going to happen, right? Whether it was that round or any other round, right?
Yeah, it certainly can. I think most of your wins, if you're ever playing against a more aggressive deck, you're probably not going past 20 minutes, so your game will be over one way or another. But the only time it's ever really going to be an issue is when you're playing against another control deck. And I think if you both play at a reasonable pace, you should be able to finish the majority of your games. There was one game in my top 8 that took absolutely forever, and we weren't playing slow. There was a lot of complex situations, and if it happened in the Swiss, it would 100% have been a draw. But we both almost went through our whole decks. I drew my whole Atlas and probably 70% of my spell deck. So it's, it definitely can go long, but in general, I think you're probably going to finish most of your rounds in time.
Do you remember who you played in each round? Just and whether you won them, or just a quick recap of round by round?
First round was Fire Earth Sorcerer. I'm pretty sure he came top 16 in the end. It was incredibly one-sided. Like, it was not even close, and it was over pretty quick. Round 2 was against Avatar of Earth, which was the pull-off roots with all the bedrocks in play, so it was a very close game, but got over the line. Round 3 is a complete blank. What was round 3? Yeah, that is completely gone. Oh, no, I remember now. It was against Redmond, who came 9th on tiebreakers because I lost my last round. So he just didn't squeak in because I lost my last round. He was playing Pathfinder, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, Pathfinder, and that was fairly solid in my favour. And I got there. 4 through 6 was the drafts.
So you won the
round
first 3
7
rounds then as well?
I won my first, lost my second, won my third in the draft. I lost to Kevin, who came 3rd overall.
That's just to be clear for everybody who didn't play in this tournament, the format was basically 3 rounds of constructed, followed by breaking off into draft pods on the standings, so in 3 rounds of draft, and then day 2 was another 3 rounds of constructed, cut the top 8. So there was 9 rounds in total. If you look at the tournament on the Curiosa website, the whole thing's messed up because the system didn't work properly for it. So
yeah.
But you were 3-0 after the first 3 rounds of constructed, is that right?
Yeah, yep. And then 2 on the draft, and then
2 on the draft. So 5-1 at the end of day 1. You were 3rd, is that right? Because we were both 5-1, right, at the end of day 1, and we were 3rd and 4th.
Yeah, I think it was equal. Yeah. So there was a 6-0, and then there was someone Kevin had slightly better tiebreakers than us, and we were 3rd, 4th.
And then you played somebody.
Round 7, I played Luca, who was 6-0 with Death Speaker. That was our draw. I had popped Roots, and I had him on Death's Door, and I had a minion that was going to kill him in 2 turns, but we ran out of time, so we both got a loss.
And and that was when because I also lost my first game, right? And then we played each other the next round because we were both 5-2.
And then we played each other next round, and then
you beat me in that one.
You were playing Avatar of Earth. It felt very close, and I
felt like I was in it for until about turn 7 or something, and then I could feel it slipping away. But maybe because I could see my hand, right? So maybe you're assuming I had a better hand than I had, but
it definitely felt very close anyway. Ended up getting over the line, and then round 9 was the Enchantress in the feature match, which I lost, but it was incredibly close. We put each other to death's door, and then I had a Midland army that was going to untap and kill him, but I also had a Royal Bodyguards on my hero, on my Geomancer, so it was very hard for him to kill me. And then he had to, for his turn, he stepped his hero forward, then he blinked it, and then he played Polymorph my Bodyguards and then Firebolts for the win. So without that 3-card combo, I don't think he had a way to kill me. So
that was the end of. Oh, let me think. So that was
the end of the Swiss. And for the people that were in the top 8, I was one of them, obviously, and then 5 of the 7 that I could play, I played in the Swiss, and then and 2 of the other people were in top 16. So I didn't have any easy matches, and it was.
No, you had very good tiebreakers, right? From memory, it was me.
I had incredible tiebreakers. I was the first on the 6s.
Kevin had really good, and I think I had.
Yep.
I was next best, maybe. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
Because I think not that this is about me, but I went 5-1, and then I lost, and then I played Jarrod and lost, and then luckily I won my last round, so I did make top 8. Do you remember I think who finished first? That was
That was the Enchantress.
Yeah.
David, he finished first. Second was it Kevin? Or was Kevin third? No, I think second was Kevin. Third was Scott, who you played in the first round. Fourth was Matt. I played him in the first round. I was 5th. You were 6th. 7th was Luca, who was the 6-0 from day 1, who lost his next 3. And then the last guy, I'm not sure who that was. I hadn't seen him all tournament, so he must have been on the lower tables and winning his way up throughout the day.
Yeah, okay. Was that the Elementalist? Was it Elementalist?
Yeah, he was the Elementalist that I never saw the deck of.
In summary, there was one Elementalist, there was 2 Avatar of Earth, which I was one of. There was one Geomancer, which was you. There was one Death Speaker, which was Luca. There was one Avatar of Air, which was Kevin. There was
an Enchantress, which was David, and a Pathfinder that I played in the first round, which was Matt.
Yeah. So it was a very diverse top 8. I mean, there were only 3 Avatar of Earth in the whole tournament, right? And 2 of them made top 8, which is pretty crazy. Yep. There was 2 Geomancers, wasn't there? There was one other Geomancer?
Yeah, there was one other guy who played Geomancer. So, yeah. I didn't see after the first round.
So 50% of Geomancers and 67% of Avatar of Earth made top 8. There you go. And I'm sure 100%
of Avatar of Airs made top 8.
In the round of 8 match, who'd you play?
I played Pathfinder, which was Matt, and that was the incredibly long one.
And you won. Did you win every round though? Didn't you?
I won every round.
And assuming that because of your position, right? Were you also?
I was on the draw. I was on the draw every game, and I won every 6-0 through the top 8.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
And in the constructed, I was effectively 5-1, but it was 4-2 because of the draw.
Yeah,
in the Swiss.
Yeah, in the Swiss. Which, I mean, it is what it is, but just for people to judge the quality of the deck.
Yeah, exactly.
As concerned, it was a 5-1 deck, basically, right?
Which means turned it into an 11-1, which is pretty reasonable.
And was there anything in the quarterfinal round of 8 match that worth mentioning?
Just the incredibly long game 2, but every match felt very much in my favor and winning. I didn't feel like I was going to lose any of the games that I was in. The top 4 with the Avatar of Earth, I thought it was going to be a more difficult match, but it was probably some of my easiest games of the whole tournament. I don't know if he just drew awkwardly or whatnot, but there was quite a few turns where he just didn't have anything. And I think it might have been he was mostly sitting on tricks, and I wasn't playing anything that he wanted to use tricks on. So
this would be like Grapple Shot or Whirling Blades or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then the final, we watched the chunk of the semi-final and then all of the final.
I had a pretty interesting win in game 1 of the finals. It was I had him on death's door, just waiting to try and kill him eventually, and then he played a Grandmaster Wizard right next to his avatar, and then I played King of the Realm to take it and kill him, which was a pretty fun way of finishing it. And then in the game 2, the way I ended up finishing it, I was winning by quite a lot, and he knew he was dead, so he played Courtesan Thrice and took one of my turns. Couldn't really do anything because he did it when I was going up to 7 mana when I had double Crater Eyes in hand, which could have been fun for him. But he basically said before he did it, he's like, let's have some fun before you win. And then so he played out my turn, did a bunch of fun things, and then I took his just by playing Thunderstorm on his head and taking the rest of the tournament.
Did he already have that in his hand, or did you top deck it?
Yeah, he did have it in his hand.
But he definitely knew he was losing when he did it then.
Yeah, yep.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, he knew it was over, but he was dead either way. Like he was like, this game's over. I can't win from here. Let's have some fun for the stream.
From a personal perspective, how did you enjoy what was the enjoyment level? I mean, we were completely sleep deprived. I know that. Yeah. Like we both live.
It was definitely a good time. But yeah, so as you were saying, we met. So on the Thursday, we didn't sleep before flying over on the Friday morning. And yeah, we ordinarily sleep.
We're night people, so most of our testing we were doing. I mean, we both work night shifts, and I normally was finishing work around 3 or 4 in the morning, and then we would do our testing after that.
Yeah.
So we were like wrapping up our testing from 4 to 7 a.m. or something, and then going to bed.
Somewhere around there. Yeah.
So we were effectively having to get up for this tournament when we would normally be going to bed.
Absolutely.
So our sleep was totally rocked, basically. We were going to the airport when we would normally be going to bed, pretty much.
Yeah, so we flew over on the Friday morning. Neither of us slept before that, so we had no sleep on the Thursday. We went to bed on the Friday night, sometime after midnight, around 1 a.m. or whatever. I managed to get about 3 hours sleep before I woke back up and couldn't get back to sleep. And then the next day was like a similar situation where I had 4 to 5 hours sleep. Waking up at 4 or 5 a.m. and just waiting to play. So by the end of the tournament, I think we'd had about 10 hours sleep in 3 or 4 days, and it was rough, but we got there. yeah.
It's very similar for me. I mean, it's interesting with the game, right? Because the game requires you to have that 100% attention, and it's as tired as you are when you're actually playing. It's like I'm sure the tiredness is going to make your impair your decision making, and maybe make some mistakes or forget. I'm sure it's going to impact the gameplay. But generally speaking, when you're actually playing, you're not tired because it requires so much focus.
For sure.
Whenever I was playing, I wasn't feeling tired. I'm sure I was making some bad, suboptimal plays, let's call it, rather than mistakes. But
I think the only actual mistake I made from being tired was in game 2 of the finals when I missed a Scourge Zombie trigger coming back, but that was it.
Yep.
And it was already a game that I had basically won.
Yeah, which is like...
At the end of the day, I didn't get punished for it, which was nice, but...
I mean, when we were doing our testing, quite often that is the type of mistake that definitely could just lose you the game, though.
For sure.
Like, it's a game that this game heavily... I don't know if it's like heavily punishes mistakes, right? I don't know if that's the way to frame it, but it heavily rewards skillful gameplay, I think, is the best.
It certainly could have been because of the way we were doing our testing, which was perfect information at all times. It felt like whenever you would make a mistake early on in the game, or almost at any point, one mistake was enough to just completely cost you the game. But it really didn't feel like that was the case. Maybe it's because more people were making mistakes against us that didn't really come up.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a big part of why we were getting so many extra wins as well. They might not have been playing perfectly, whereas all of our testing was done against perfect information. So we weren't, when we play perfectly or almost perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, we would often just... It'd be like 3 turns later and we're like, oh, no, that was not the right way to play this deck that we didn't know how to play, right? So we would just rewind 3 turns and do it how they should have done it.
Yeah.
Not less for our decks, but more when we play this Enchantress deck is popular, let's say, or this other deck is popular, and we want to see if we can beat these popular decks. We were really trying to do our best to make sure that we were playing against the best version of these decks, but also piloted in the best way possible that we could manage, right?
Which definitely gave us a much better understanding of how to play out all the matchups.
Yeah,
in general,
I mean, we definitely did a lot of preparation for it, but we'll cover that on another video, the general preparation and some other tips, and also how we prepared for the draft, because that's probably pretty interesting, because it was just the two of us that we did all of our testing just in a vacuum, just the two of us, sort of not really caring too much about the rest of the world, so to speak, or not playing against anybody else. So it was very interesting. I think I'll thank you as well. Like, back in the day, 20 something years ago, we did a massive amount of preparation for a PTQ once for Magic, and it was an absolute blast. Like, we were like preparing every weekend. Like, you just crash at my place for like 3 days straight, and we just play Magic for like 30 hours. It was extended, I think, and it had like...
Yeah, it was
like an unsolved format at the time, and all of these sort of like... We had all this deck tech and all of this discovery of all these cards that nobody was using. It felt very reminiscent of that. Obviously, there's a ton of differences, including like we're old men now instead of young boys or whatever, but it had a lot of similarity. It was like really fun doing all that preparation with you. The prep was a blast. The tournament, I mean, it was a bit unfortunate that we were so sleep deprived, but it was a blast. Really, it's not something that I could manage on a permanent scale, but like to do it permanently through life, it was exhausting. The weekend, it's like need days to recover, and the preparation that we did was, I don't know, somewhat serious, right? Like, we were committed to it. We had a commitment that meant that we did what we had to do in life, like work and other stuff, but as far as our free time went, we committed most of our free time to testing. So
for sure,
it's not something that we could do on a sustained basis, but maybe we'll do it again for another tournament for this, because it was really fun, but it was a commitment. Yeah, it was definitely good times, but it was work.
But yeah, it was fun work. Like,
I mean, obviously it helped that you won.
Absolutely
It's got to help.
Yeah, for sure.
I got to feel like it made it all more worth it.
I mean, at the end of the day, it was still fun before we played the tournament, so it was still good times. Just like, it mostly just felt like just hanging out, and that's just what we were doing while we're hanging out for a big part of it, and that was certainly fun. And yeah, the tournament itself was good times, and obviously winning helps, but I think we were going over expecting that we would both top 8.
We put in a lot of effort, and we were discovering all of these things that was cropping up. We were discovering it independently, just the two of us, and then it was cropping up into the meta like months later. So we knew that that we were on the right track. And we also knew that the Chaos Twister changed things a lot, and very few people, if any, that in the tournament that we played would have done the amount of testing that we did with the absence of the Chaos Twister. When you're saying we had the expectation to top 8, I think it's more like we would have been disappointed if we didn't. It's not.
Yeah, that's fair to say.
I mean, and I know that I sort of had hopes that you might be able to win. I always felt like you were a better player than me anyway. So, but I can hold my own against you. It's possible that I might be able to win, but I always felt like if one of us was going to win, it was more likely that it was going to be you. But we did both make top 8, and we were both in a very comfortable position at the end of the first day. We're both 5-1.
Yeah.
Also, I think just generally, you were really, really good at Magic the Gathering, right? Like you played at a high level for a long time as well, and a separate conversation about how much of that's transferable. Maybe that makes an interesting video about overlap and lack thereof between this and Magic. But I mean, I think it's just sort of, there's that expectation, but there's also that history that you've competed at a high level in these types of games, and there's also just the sheer amount of effort that we put into this. Like we put so much effort testing this.
It's definitely a big thing of just being comfortable in that situation, right? From all the previous years of playing Magic at a high level. Like there was no nerves going into it, that sort of thing. There was definitely some nerves from some people who was like, they're very fresh to it. Like they didn't have lots of background in that sort of thing. And they're coming in, Sorcery is like one of their fairly new to the gaming scene. So,
yeah. I mean, even I just not even in the top 8, right? Like just near when I was playing the final rounds and you're playing against people that are potentially making top 8, I think I know a couple of my opponents had very shaky hands, let's say. Like they were there's not a criticism. Like if I go back 20 years when I was playing Magic, I definitely would have been one of these people with shaky hands when you're potentially making the top 8 for something like that. But yeah, like you're saying, with the age and the experience, like you don't really want to be nervous. You want to be composed, basically. Like you want to be focused at the task in hand. So that definitely helped you. You also, I mean, draft is something we'll talk about separate, but that was being able to not 0-3 your draft and ideally 3-0 it and hopefully at least 2-1 it was a big part of our general plan for this. And that actually saved me personally, by the way. 3-0ing my draft was that's the reason why I made top 8 in the end.
Yeah.
And we had a draft strategy for that we did just the two of us. We'll talk about that separately. But you've also been, generally speaking, I think you're a stronger constructed player than me, and a stronger and a less stronger draft player than, like, you're a stronger draft player than me, but the gap is not as big as what it is between constructed, if you know what.
Yeah, that's fair.
Frame that. Like, I'm much closer to you in draft than what I am in constructed. It made it interesting. Like, for me, I think it was a bit awkward in the implementation because the system didn't work at all. And I don't know, it's hard to do it well. Like, as well, like, to make it fair, like, I know because of the draft pods and because of the disparity in skill level, like, there was a massive amount of difference in the quality of the draft in the first pod versus the second pod versus the third pod and so on.
For sure.
It sort of made everything a bit weird. Potentially the reason I made top 8 is because I lost the first round of constructed. And that got me in.
Certainly.
And even though I won the next 2 rounds of constructed, my tiebreakers were a bit worse, and therefore I got into a lower draft pod, and then I easily 3-0'd that draft pod. But if I had have won my first 2 rounds of constructed and then lost the third one, I might have ended up in the top draft pod, and then I probably wouldn't have 3-0'd the draft pod. So it's this sort of weird dynamic. But I think on the whole, it's interesting. It was interesting to, like, for 2 full days and to break it up a bit, right? Like, it definitely was interesting, but it's hard to get that balance right, I think.
For sure.
But I think in particular that top draft pod was just, like, really difficult, right? Like, your draft
it was a rough one.
There was, like, cards popping up in decks that were like Grey Wolves and stuff, just like a single Grey Wolf in a deck or whatever. Like, I don't know, just it was hard. So
yeah,
the weekend in general, like, we met a lot of great people. I hope we didn't get to shout at everybody, but we shouted out a lot. I think it was really good. Like, I wasn't expecting people to be that friendly. Generally.
Yeah, everyone was wonderful. Like, in general, there was no negativity.
Ourselves. normally in this type of thing, I can imagine if it was a Magic the Gathering tournament, for example, Jarrod and myself in another event, in another world, we would have just been off by ourselves in the corner talking the whole time, right?
Yeah.
Not interacting with anyone, but this was a total opposite.
Everyone was very inclusive, like always wanted to, like as soon as we rocked up, like everyone's like, oh yeah, who are you, where are you from? Like, and every time when you sat down, it wasn't just all business straight away. Everyone would have like a bit of a chat, you know, everyone introduced themselves. Like that's definitely not a thing in most other tournaments. Like just the overall feel about the whole community it was great to be there.
And Daria was just, I mean, there was not like she was the only girl, but it wasn't, let's say it was very male dominated. She was off, and she's quite reserved as well, but she was talking to everybody, basically. Everyone she played against, she was talking. She had hardly played the game before as well, and she was a bit unsure whether she even wanted to play, but, you know, in the end, she had an absolute blast, and her main regret, if you want to call it that, was she was just saying she really wished she had have actually just practiced beforehand. Like she had have actually just prepared better for it, because she didn't realise it would just be so much fun playing the game. And we just shout out the organisers for the event and everything, and Jesse in particular. Yeah,
Jesse was great. Getting everything organised, he was like all over it with just everything. Anytime you had questions, he was like on the ball. If you didn't know, he was like straight away looking it up. Yeah, he ran it very well. Dealt with issues that arise. That's all you can ask for.
Yeah, it kind of felt a little bit like he was always everywhere at once, almost like, judge, and somehow he's like at 3 tables at the same time answering the question. I mean, not literally, right, but he's bouncing around pretty quickly. You know, he had some help as well, but it's definitely the case to say that probably this whole event just doesn't happen if it's not for him.
Oh, absolutely.
I think so. And the prize pool was kind of ridiculously good, really, when you consider how many players were in the event. And it was, I don't really want to get into exact numbers or anything, but it was just crazy good. I can't even imagine a Magic the Gathering event ever existed that had a prize pool this good for that anyone could
number of players,
$50 or whatever, and there's 50 players. It's like the prizes were insane. I doubt that's sustainable over time, but you know, it doesn't have to be at that level to be really good, right? Like it could still, I think it's just because the game's so collectible in nature that as soon as you get anything that's collectible as part of the prizes, it automatically makes it somewhere between valuable and just really interesting, you know what I mean, to own the things that you win.
For sure.
But yeah, the prize pool was really good, and it was also really good to meet Eric and Chris.
Yep.
That's something that it's a pretty easy to see there's another version of your life where you never get to meet them too. Do you know what I mean? Like it's
absolutely.
Like, you love Path of Exile in particular, so it was like it's kind of, I don't know if weird is the word, but it's just like
super cool. I think super cool is the word.
Yeah, but it's just interesting how it's like some random card game in a way is like your path to be able to meet these people that are responsible for your favorite computer game. That obviously it's not like they've got nothing to do with it because Eric made it.
Yeah.
But it's like, I don't know, it's like a very nice coincidence, I guess would be the way to put it.
Absolutely.
It wasn't like just meet, say hello, and that's it. They actually afforded some time to us.
Yeah, actually have like good chats and meaningful chats as well.
So I think there's a lot of, you put all of that together and it's just like, like if it wasn't for the sleep deprivation, it would have been totally awesome, but that was like holding us back a bit. But we tried to fight
for sure
it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how, but the humidity was just horrible. I didn't realise Melbourne had so much more humidity than Adelaide, but it was so humid in Melbourne. I don't know. I never realised it. So it was making it all a bit uncomfortable the whole weekend. But luckily it had good air conditioning where we were in the venue, so it wasn't too bad in the venue, which was where we were most of the time. It was mostly outside of it.
Yeah, the venue on is another thing that was just great. Like, clean, the toilets were amazing, like just in general. Their store is very good quality.
You've done the rounds on the CCG scene when that's the first thing you think of, like you've been to some bad places when that's the top of the list. But very clean. But so we did tables, comfortable chairs, lots of space,
long days, and there wasn't just that general gamer BO smell throughout the whole venue. It was impressive.
Yeah, I mean, they even had like dehumidifiers and air filters and stuff in the bathroom. But they had deodorant in the bathroom as well for people, right? Like that. Yeah. They know the gamer crowd.
Yeah.
They got the deodorant because they know that most of them are gonna forget to bring their own. So, but yeah, the store was excellent, and the chairs were comfortable, which is important when you're sitting on them for 2 days straight.
Yeah.
And like Sorcery in particular demands a lot of table space. They did a pretty good job of that. Like, it was a little bit awkward on the middle of the benches. Maybe that's just me being old and having a bit of a dodgy back, having to twist it.
I think was a little bit just because their table's set up for 4 across, and with the size of like the Sorcery play area, it was very much you had to go 3 across. And if you were trying to squeeze in 4, it felt a bit awkward.
And we did the draft on the Friday night when we arrived, so there was something on to do that day as well, which was good. And that even had pretty good prizes, right? Like, you finished second in a draft that cost $20, and you got an alpha booster pack for finishing second.
It was good.
So that was pretty good. And yeah, I don't know, we had a pretty good, I mean, the whole weekend was pretty good generally. And even when it came to the Monday, I was asking Daria what she wants to do on the Monday, and in the end she was just like, let's just go back to the store, just play some more Sorcery. And you know, could have done anything in Melbourne, right? And then in the end it was like, well, we did have our bags and stuff, so it was a bit uncomfortable carrying them around, but still, I think that is a bit of a testament, at least. Like, she saw on the Facebook group that there was a bunch of that Kevin, and I think Kevin posted, you know what I mean, that so there was a posted a few people there, and as soon as she saw that, she was like, let's just go to the store. So we ended up just back there basically on the Monday, didn't we?
Yeah, pretty much.
And then just chilled out there till our flight. So yeah, in the end it was like we were there for all day Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and basically we just spent, even though the tournament was just Saturday and Sunday, we pretty much spent the Friday and the Monday all there as well, right? And that was just through choice, pretty much. Yeah, and a big part of that was probably the toilets, as you said, just being super comfortable and super clean, and the whole place just generally not. Well, I mean, if the whole place just, you know, generally smelt like body odor and everything, it's not going to be that comfortable to voluntarily stay there longer than you need to, right? Yeah, maybe we've just been too through maybe we've
just been on the
bad experiences,
been on the bad side.
Stores. And maybe it's just the case that these days that's just not reflective of the average experience. Maybe all the ones in Adelaide these days are also super clean and super nice, but that definitely was not the case 20 years ago. So yeah, all right, we done then, are we?
Seems like it.
Well, yep, thanks again. Thanks for taking the time to do this as well. We'll do some more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully. I'm trying to think of a good way to close it. For anyone who's listened after all of this time, might be good to ask them something.
As long as it's not smash like and subscribe, I'm down for it.
Yeah. We threw some ideas around about what we might be able to do, but obviously this is extremely long form content, not for everybody. It's only for some, but if you're still here,
it'll definitely need timestamps for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, anyone here listening now, obviously it's, you know, they don't mind the long form content because I hung around for all this time. So
yeah, I know I prefer it.
Yeah, same as me, but I also know that most people don't, but I definitely prefer it, as you do. Yeah,
we're old.
Yeah,
we can get behind a 3-hour podcast.
But we threw around some ideas about stuff that we could do for future content. Probably will immediately do something about just the general preparation and general card evaluation, in our opinion. Probably do something about our preparation for the draft. But if there's anything else that you would like us to do, just let us know and we'll factor that in. So thank you. Thanks for getting to the end, and we'll catch you for the next one.